Hello, this is your State Senator Len Suzio, speaking to you from the Capitol. I'm in the upper echelons of the Capitol right now, and I'm having a fun day. A lot of interesting things have been happening up here, but what I wanted to do today was have an interview with one of my colleagues in the Senate, someone I've known for decades now, and someone who I have the utmost respect for, Senator Joe Markley. Joe and I both share parts of Cheshire in our respective Senate districts, and I think Joe is probably one of the most intellectually accomplished members of the Senate. He can quote Shakespeare on the floor of the Senate, so that impresses me, and Joe and I share a lot of the same political philosophy. So we're here today to talk about a few things. First, I think we'll talk about the governor's State of the State, which was given yesterday, and then we'll talk about what we think are the important issues coming up in the upcoming session, and what our thoughts are on that. So first of all, Joe, thank you for coming today.
No, my pleasure.
You and I go way back when to, I guess it was Tom Scott's campaign.
In 1990 was the first time I met you. I still remember, to tell you the truth.
28 years ago,
Yeah,
Joe.
yeah.
Boy, you were still in college then, weren't you?
I had a big bushy head of hair, and yeah, completely different. No, it was, but we were both younger. But and I wouldn't have guessed that we were going to both end up here together. In fact, it's funny. I think I've said to you before, the first time I met you, I was so impressed. You spoke to a group, and I thought, that man is a good speaker. He believes in the right thing. And I said, and I thought we could run him for the legislature. I said, what town are you from? And he said, Meriden. And I thought, oh, we can't elect a Republican in Meriden, but by golly, you've done it.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't have ever seen myself being in the state Senate at that time either. But it's funny how life goes.
That's right.
I got interested in politics partly because of you and Tom Scott, by the way.
Yeah.
It was my first real experience inside a political campaign.
Yeah.
And I was impressed by it and intrigued by it. Mm-hmm. It was really interesting.
Well, you're natural.
I don't know, but it's funny. And late in life, it became more and more appealing to me as my kids grew up and flew the coop. And, so I'm an empty nester now, and I have more time. And my wife says, go ahead and bother them up at the Senate instead of bothering me. But let's talk a little bit. The governor gave a State of the Speech presentation or speech yesterday. You and I were both there, sitting front and center watching him. Give me, first of all, your overall thoughts about what the governor said or didn't say, as the case may be.
Well, the speech was much more interesting for what he didn't say. And in that sense, it was a little bit like a Twilight Zone speech, where you say, everyone knows what the issue is in Connecticut right now. It's the budget, it's taxes, it's spending, it's economic decline. It's all those things that did not come up. Basically, the governor came out and said, I released the budget a couple of days ago, so there's no point in talking about the budget. So I'm going to talk about fairness and, and how we're going to create fairness in Connecticut. I want to say, I feel like you got a better chance of creating a budget that at least we have control over than fairness, this kind of amorphous, impossible goal that government sets for itself. And obviously, he had two purposes. One was to avoid talking about the budget, which has been a disaster, and the economy, which is a disaster. I mean, it's been 7 years of decline under Dan Malloy, and we're in worse shape now for having had him as governor than we were to begin with. So he didn't want to bring that up. Instead, he wanted to bring up talking points that he knew would appeal to his base in the Democratic Party. So at least half the chamber would applaud for him, which is what happened. So he talked about issues of wage equality and all kinds of minimum wage, paid sick leave, et cetera, things that play to the Democratic base, things which really are not crucial at this moment of crisis. So in that sense, it was just a waste of our time.
Yeah, I kind of had the same reaction, but I also think, to me, a politician is at their best when they're developing a consensus. I think it's important to lead the people by developing a consensus. And it means taking on sometimes contentious issues, but with the whole idea not to divide and conquer, but to build some kind of a rapprochement between people that might be at odds with one another. To me, that's one of the noble aspects of politics. If you can bring people together, have a different set of opinions, and get them dialoguing and talking together, eventually maybe developing a compromise or a middle ground where you can govern. But like you say, the governor yesterday, he basically said all the platitudes that you would associate with liberal progressive Democrats, and therefore was reaching to the more partisan elements in the party. And it was reflected, as you said, Joe, half the room was erupting in applause, the other half was just dead silent. There was no attempt even to reach across the aisle and develop some kind of, at least on a couple of issues, something where we could all kind of say, yeah, let's work together. We can do something on that. And that to me was probably a hallmark of his administration when you think about it. Number one, he always appealed, I think, to strident partisan political interest. He would pick issues that were social issues and very divisive issues, but it would unite his base behind him, even though if it divided the rest of the state. And it allowed him to avoid the really important issues that are coming up, which we're going to talk about in a minute, which, with the session coming on, the governor, I guess, is not going to be much of a part of it, although he still is the governor and he still can veto legislation and that kind of a thing. But it's kind of a strange thing that I've seen develop up here, Joe, and you've been up here longer than I, but I've never seen a situation where the governor has become alienated from both parties in the legislature. Right. Not just, usually it's, of course, the people of the other party. And you've been up here, Joe, first of all, you were up here in the 80s, and then you've been up here for how many years now?
Well, since 2011.
Okay. Yeah. So you've been up here for 8 years, 10 years when you add all together. So, and you've seen, at least governors come and go a couple of times. What's your observation of the situation of the governor vis-a-vis the legislature itself right now?
You're right. It is unique in my experience. I don't know what it's been like near the end of other governors' terms who knew they were going to be leaving office. But I think that Malloy's problem isn't simply that he's a lame duck. It's that his own party has lost confidence in his leadership, and they've been forced to try to make policy themselves, and in the end they've been forced to try to make policy with the Republicans. And another problem with Malloy, you can't help, the personal element is part of the political world. There's no getting around it. And Dan Malloy himself describes himself as a porcupine. So I won't argue with him about that. I think he is. And if you don't have a certain amount of charm, and you don't have a cudgel, you don't really have too much going for you. And I think that's the situation that he finds himself in. So he's, for instance, this budget, I'm on the Appropriations Committee. We're going to get the presentation tomorrow. You've been through that in past sessions. I don't know how significant the governor's budget proposal really is, whether the Appropriations Committee is going to sit down and look at that package of tax increases that he proposed and take it seriously, or if that's all dead on arrival. We'll find out in the next few days or the next few weeks, I suppose. And that is what he gave us in the budget, to leave the speech behind for a moment. The budget that came out a day or two before was another package of tax increases just to save us in this current year that we're behind money on, and tolls and all the rest of it. And I don't know if there's a stomach for that in his own party going into an election.
It's interesting. I know there's been some criticism of Republicans in the sense that we've gotten to a position now of equal power in the Senate, at least. And how do we deal with that power? But it's been my observation that the Democrats are equally perplexed by the position they're in. First of all, when Governor Malloy was first elected, going back in 2011, as you pointed out, it had been 26 or 28 years since we had a Democratic governor. So while they were the party of power in the legislature, they weren't in the executive office. And so this was a new dynamic. And when I was here for those first 2 years, Joe, like you were, and it struck me that they were almost obeisant to the governor.
Yes.
Anything he wanted, they gave him. They didn't know how to even contend with him about any issues. And now we're at the end of his administration after 8 years, and it's totally the opposite. It's going 180 degrees, I should say, not 360. We'd be back where we started. What are your observations about that? I mean, the dynamics of the relationship between the executive and then the respective parties.
Well, it's absolutely true. Part of the problem, and I think part of what torments Malloy, is the fact that he got his way and it didn't work. And at a certain point, you lose faith in the captain that has been running the ship on the rocks. And from his point of view, of course, I think he's got a Democratic legislature that, if it had its druthers, would have gone even more to the left than he has. So he's really doesn't have a friend in the Republican Party, which would have wanted him to go in another direction to begin with, and the Democrats who don't think he went far enough. And he doesn't have any successes to point to. I was convinced that Milei took office in 2011 facing a large deficit, and I believe he thought, I'm going to make a tax increase, a large tax increase, but then the economy will come back and things will right themselves and we'll be able to go forward from there. But what he didn't realize, and what he still won't admit, is that large tax increase, largest tax increase in state history that passed in 2011, both of us voted against it, that in itself helped kill our economy. So the economy has never recovered the way it should have. And the revenues have never been what they anticipated, because the tax increases themselves have depressed economic activity. And so we keep digging a deeper and deeper hole for ourselves. We've now had 3 tax increases in the 7 years that Milei has been governor, and now what he's asking for is a 4th increase. And who can have any confidence in that? If you're a conservative, if you're a Republican, you'd say we've got to stop going down the road of tax increases. And if you're a progressive, you'd say we've got to go after the rich. We've got to go ahead and double down on what we've been doing. And Milei is kind of stuck between those two sides.
Well, you've raised some of the issues that I know are going to be the most important and the most contentious issues as the session starts. One of them, of course, is the budget itself and how we balance it, with Republicans basically saying enough with the tax increases. We've done there, and more than doubled. I'd say we quadrupled, Joe, because he did the biggest tax increase in 2011, and in 2015 he did the second biggest tax increase.
That's right.
So, and that didn't work. And even this most recently passed budget, which you and I voted against, that had, by my count, 17 different tax or fee hikes in it. 485 million, I think, is what the number was. So we are really on the horns of the dilemma, because if we're not going to raise taxes, and you and I are firmly in that corner, we got to figure out, well, where are we going to cut? What are we going to do to balance the budget? Everybody says in the long run, the way to do that, of course, is grow the economy. That's the easy way. That's what everybody wants to do. The problem is you can't turn the Queen Mary around on a dime. It's going to take years before we can restore the vitality of Connecticut's economy, which itself will be a source of increasing revenues and the ability for us to provide more for our citizens. So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about how we approach this dilemma of a budget that is out of balance, where we really do need to, we can't look at tax increases. So where would you go? What are your thoughts on looking at where we can cut and what we need to do to have not just a temporarily balanced budget, but a budget that's balanced really based on long-term dynamics?
Well, I know economic growth is an easy solution, but it's also the only solution. There's nothing else that's going to get us out of our problems. And I think that it could happen quicker than we might expect if we started to do the right thing. I say sometimes to people, it's like if you go away on vacation sometimes and you come home and your plants are all dried out, and you look at them and think, I might as well throw it away, but I'll throw a little water on it. Sometimes you're surprised at how they come back, because there's still some life in those roots. And I feel like that's true with our economy here in Connecticut, especially because as a state, we're in competition with other states. And if we can suddenly make ourselves look attractive and demonstrate to people that we are going in a different direction, that a new day has come, I think that the investment might follow. We still have the advantages as a state that gave us our prosperity in the first place. We've got a wonderful location within the country, on the coast between New York and Boston, on transportation routes. We've got the best higher education, I would think, of any political subdivision practically on the face of the earth, with having Yale and Wesleyan and Trinity and the fine public schools we have. We have an educated workforce. Those advantages haven't gone away yet. If we could just stop doing what has made our state so unattractive, which is raising taxes, increasing regulations. And if people see that we have done so, I think they might start to have confidence in it and come back. But you're right, it's not, even if it happens quickly, it can't happen instantaneously. And we're going to have to go through a budget cycle or two that I think will be very painful in terms of spending. And when I first was running again in 2010, Len, I kept saying we have to cut carefully, but we have to cut steadily. And what we haven't done it, and now we're getting ourselves in a position where we're not going to be able to cut carefully. We're going to start to see cuts coming, as happened just recently with this Medicare savings account, that cuts are going to be made that people are going to say, wait a second, that's too close to the bone. I think some of them are going to be equally painful and not necessarily reversible. All that said, I am still convinced there is fat and considerable fat in that budget to be cut. I heard one of our Republican gubernatorial candidates say last night, we've cut to the bone. And I thought, as long as we're spending, we're requiring $1 million a year to be spent on public artworks for new construction. Again, I don't mean to pick out art as a target, but the kind of art we're talking about and the kind of expenditure we're talking about, I feel like you can't tell me that's a critical function in times like this. You've heard some of our gubernatorial candidates talk about zero-based budgeting. I put a bill in last session. I thought it was actually a clever idea to require 2 state agencies as a pilot to do zero-based budgeting. And what that would mean is, instead of a current services budget where we say, if we continue to do what we're doing, this is how much it will cost us to do that next year. You say, let's pretend we're not spending any money at all and decide where the money has to go. And I've talked to people that say the savings you can find by approaching a budget that way are very substantial. But we do have the problem that Governor Muley has tied our hands with the state employees' agreements, the CBAC agreement that was extended for 10 years at his behest. And we also have now a tremendous fixed costs, which have risen dramatically in recent years because of borrowing. It's like having a mortgage payment. You can't save money on your mortgage. Maybe you can save money on your meals and on your dining out, but the mortgage is the mortgage. You have to pay it, and our debt is our debt. At some point, we are going to have to look at our obligations and our unfunded liabilities, and I think if we're honest with ourselves, we have to say, no amount of economic growth is going to put us in a position to be able to meet these obligations. We have to come up with a new arrangement.
I have to confess some envy, Joe. You always come up with these unbelievably good metaphors. And when you talked about coming home from vacation and finding the dead plants and putting a little water on them and they're revitalized, I think I'm going to save that one. You always come up with these.
Some of them come back, not all of them. I hope Connecticut is one that has the life and the roots. I really do believe so, and it is a great state, and it's been tough for me to be a kind of a messenger of gloom for these 7 years. But I think you have to be honest about it. It's like when you go to a doctor. I'll give you another metaphor. When you go to a doctor, you don't want the doctor to tell you it's great, it's wonderful, it's fine, unless it is. If the doctor needs to tell you you need treatment, you need to stop smoking, you need to lose weight, whatever it is, you want honesty. And we're in that position. We have to be honest with the people because we're the ones that are making the prescription for the state.
Well, that's good. That's a good lead into the next question I have for you. And you mentioned about the vast number of unfunded liabilities and debt that we have. I myself have come out and said, I think the CBAC deal has to be renegotiated. And it's not because I cast any aspersions on state employees themselves. Some people like to use the state employees as a punching bag. It's just that the deal, as it was ratified and approved, negotiated and then approved by the legislature on a straight party line vote, is not sustainable. It's impossible, in my opinion, for the state to meet the obligations that are in that agreement. And if you have an agreement that's not worth the paper it's printed on, then it's a pretty worthless document, even though you might feel good that you've got a contract. And I've said that we need to really revisit that. And I believe it can be done in a way that doesn't mean that state employees have to reduce their compensation, but we've got to take a look at these benefits and especially the retirement benefits and how they're calculated and determined. Spiking, for example, is one thing that we have to do this, and it's not only in the best interest of the state. I think it's personally in the best interest of the state employees, Because if you don't have a realistic deal, and think about this, Joe, for 20 years they've been kind of whistling past the graveyard. They knew that the fund wasn't being adequately funded, but we'll get to that point when we get to it. And then, of course, when we got to it, we can't pay for it, so we have to renegotiate CBAC, and we've done that 2 or 3 times now, and it's just like putting a Band-Aid on it. And my opinion is that that the latest deal is no more reliable than the original deal, which is inevitably going to fail. So that it would be in the best interest of the state employees to have a deal that they know the state can meet without destroying the state, and therefore they could be secure. But I know that's kind of like a third rail. I don't know how you feel about that. You and I have not personally talked about the CBAC agreement. It's certainly a difficult and awkward issue. But what are your thoughts, if you care to share them?
Well, it's certainly, I don't blame the state employees or anyone else for getting the best deal they can get. And really the blame is on the people who negotiated the deal for committing us to something that we simply can't pay for. But I do think, again, to use a different metaphor, you have a business situation where sometimes a business has to go to its creditors and say, we can't we can't pay this without going out of business. If you can take 85 cents on the dollar, we can pay you. If you want to force us into bankruptcy, I can't promise you what you're going to get. And that's the situation Connecticut is getting into with payments that they simply can never make. Now, what bankruptcy amounts to for a state, what the collapse of our ability to pay really would look like, I don't know. But I know this, we can't keep raising taxes the way we are. Because we're going in, it will drive us into a kind of a death spiral where we raise them more and more, we raise less and less from them. The industry goes, we kill off the wealth generation within the state, and there's no way to recover from it. We've got to end that cycle. And I think that the unions have to come back, have to recognize that at a certain point and come back. And I guess I'd say, you mentioned a couple of specific things about pensions that could be addressed in terms of spiking and various aspects of them that are, I think even union members would say, yes, that's a poor practice. Another thing I'd say is, we talk about the number of pensions that pay out over $100,000 a year, including pensions that are even paying more than $300,000 a year. $300,000 a year pension to state employees. I think that I might be more comfortable, and I think the average taxpayer in Connecticut might be more comfortable if we said we've really got to focus our savings on the end of the pensions of the people that can afford to take these cuts. If you've got a pension, if you're living on $38,000 a year, that's a very different situation from living on $138,000 a year. And I think that maybe we need to start, just as we have progressive income tax, and in fact it's the left that says these things should be progressive. I think maybe we ought to look at some progressivity in the renegotiation of the pensions and try to focus on finding savings on the high end from people who presumably, in fact, absolutely can afford it. I'm not saying that it doesn't change your lifestyle if you went from a pension of 140 down to 120, but presumably you're not going to be in poverty. You're just going to have to cut back a little.
Yeah, there was a story that actually came out this week about I think there was 1,400 state retirees who have pensions that exceed $100,000.
Yes.
And some of them are into $200,000 range. I think I like your approach that it's a question of, well, the governor himself said fairness. So
yeah.
why not use his rhetoric and his proposal and say, let's be fair about pensions then. Let's not penalize everybody. Let's take the ones who can afford to reduce their benefits a little bit and still get a rich benefit.
That's right.
And save it for the people who don't have quite such rich benefits.
Yes, I think that's something. If I were in the position of negotiating, that's something I would try to do. And I suppose it would show a certain amount of goodwill. I mean, it shows a certain sensitivity to the fact that you are having an impact on people who were depending on something.
Joe, one of the dynamics of the legislature is going to be that we have to have a bipartisan deal. But we did have a bipartisan deal in October, and then the governor vetoed it, and he's still looming there in the background, and there's kind of a dysfunctional relationship between him and the legislature right now. One of my concerns is, as a fellow senator, is we might come up with a pretty nice bipartisan deal, but if the governor vetoes it, that opens the door to the extreme elements in his party to be controlling the whole thing, because we need is it a 60% or 2/3 vote to override a veto?
2/3.
2/3. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's formidable. That's formidable because Republicans have just about half in the Senate and barely half in the House. So that means we need a considerable amount of Democrats to override a veto, and we did have, as you know, some Democrats join us for that. It was bipartisan, but it was still not enough to override the veto. What are your thoughts on how that might work out?
It's hard to say how this is going to play out. I predicted last year that we would end up where we did, which was a bipartisan budget that lost some Republican votes from conservatives like you and I, and that lost some liberal votes in the Senate, just Gary Winfield. It is funny that I think people say, well, that must be good if it's the people in the center that went for it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. I don't think it was good. I can't predict this time. We did have the example, of course, with the Medicare savings accounts, that the governor vetoed it, and the override was close to unanimous. So it's possible that if people reach a point of saying, we think we've got a good product, that's it. All that said, I don't see the Republicans going for another tax increase this year under any circumstances. And if that's the case, it might come down to the Democrats owning a budget, as they are capable of doing. 18 votes in the Senate with the lieutenant governor. If they can keep the moderate Democrats that broke our way happy, they can still put through a Democratic budget.
We have only a couple of minutes left in this interview, but I want to at least touch upon tolls and the highway issue, okay? So keeping in mind, Joe, that we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left, maybe what are your thoughts on the issues related to tolls?
Don't fall for it. That's my thought. And that's what I keep telling. I speak to so many good conservatives and people I agree with on every other issue who say, no, we need tolls. And the argument usually comes down to the out-of-staters are going through Connecticut without paying. And if I go to New York, I have to pay. And I think, so that's the nice thing about being in Connecticut. You don't have to pay, right? Why do you say, do you like paying when you're in New York? One thing to remember is the DOT said in a study they put out in 2015 that the number of out-of-state drivers on our interstates is a maximum of 25%. So if we put tolls in, we're paying 75% to get 25% from out-of-state residents. It's not a very good deal. And the second myth is this idea that somehow we can impose tolls in a way that only out-of-staters will end up paying them. We can't put the federal government won't let us put the tolls on the borders, or if we try to do it, they're going to take away our highway funds and probably charge us for all the funds we've received since the tolls came down. That's just not going to happen. If the tolls come back, again, the DOT study indicated every limited access highway in Connecticut, not just the interstates or the Merritt, but 691 that I drive over to see you in Meriden, 72, 8, 9, 2, whatever interstate you can think of. And they talked about having the overpasses that would read to collect the tolls every 4 or 5 miles. And they also talked about tolls as high as 20 cents a mile. 20 cents a mile, I don't know, how long is your drive to?
20 miles.
20 miles. It is for me too, to Hartford. At 20 miles, if we did that 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, that's almost $2,000 that we'd pay in tolls to commute from Meriden or from Southington to Hartford. So be careful what you wish for, anybody that's thinking about tolls, because you won't get the tolls you dream of. You'll get the tolls that you're stuck with.
Gee, we're just getting warmed up, and I've got to.
I did all the talking too.
We got to have another interview session.
I'll
Joe.
interview
we'll
you
get into
next
the tolls, and that'd be kind of interesting. We'll go reciprocate. But it's been a great pleasure talking to you today. I consider you again to be one of the more dynamic and thoughtful legislators up here, Joe. It's always a pleasure. I love to listen to you, and I always learn a new metaphor every time.
Thank you. Well, I consider you one of the best men up here and one of my best friends in this world.
Well, that's an honor, that's for sure for me. I want to thank all of you for watching today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. I always like speaking to Senator Markley, and again, I learned a new metaphor today too. This is your State Senator Len Suzio saying thank you. It's been an honor to represent you up in Hartford. I look forward to the upcoming session and fighting for you, my constituents, in every way.